Welcome to the show, Jannese.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm not going to waste these people's valuable time, so let's jump right into the question. How do you save money when you're already broke?
I know a lot of people can relate to the idea of feeling like you are not getting ahead no matter what you do. But I think there kind of has to be a two-pronged approach in my perspective. The first is plugging up potential leaks in your budget. I think there's always opportunities for us to take a look at things that we're spending money on, whether that's like a cell phone plan or subscriptions and things like that, and just assessing whether or not you actually are getting the best deal. I am notorious for calling service providers at the end of a term or contract and basically threatening them to quit or unsubscribe. And you will be surprised how often you'll be able to reinstate that introductory offer that got you the service in the first place. I've done that with like streaming providers. I think a great opportunity for people to save money is something like cell phone service, right? Companies like Mint Mobile are great for lowering that cell phone bill by potentially 75% of your costs going with like a traditional provider like a Verizon or a T-Mobile. And you're getting the same level of service because a lot of these companies are just using each other's networks. So just take a look at opportunities to save money on services that maybe you just don't need or you can downgrade. And then I think, there's only so much you can cut. So this is when we got to start talking about potentially increasing our income. I love me a good side hustle. Side hustles have been the way that I've been able to become debt-free, invest my way to financial independence, and just really set myself up for financial security. So when you aren't making enough money, you gotta spend some time thinking about what are those ways that you can increase your income, either by pursuing a different career, looking for opportunities for promotions or job hopping, or just starting a side hustle that you can earn extra money.
And we're here today on talking about how to save money when you're broke. You're listening to Life After Debt with the Marcus Garrett, weekly conversation with your favorite influencers and entrepreneurs about life after debt. I'm here today with Jannese Torres, a first-gen creator and host of the award-winning personal finance podcast, Yo Quiero Dinero, and the book, as I see right here behind it, let me bring it up one more time, Financially Lit, the Modern Latina's Guide to Leveling Up Your Dinero and Becoming Financially. Help me with that word because I almost butchered it in the postscript.
Poderosa.
I appreciate you. I wrote powerful.
That is what it means.
For those of you who were wondering at home. With your Dinero, because she didn't have a clue what she was doing with money for a very long time. So I think, well, actually, I don't want to assume. I've seen all the estimates because it's something I've been doing for the last 20 years, but it's always between 40 to 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck or cannot afford an expense from $400 to $1,000. For some reason, someone did an article, CNBC, shout out to you, I believe it was. I don't think a lot of people can afford a $1,000 emergency, but that being said, without tapping into a credit card. Jannese, you talked about cutting both cutting expenses, increasing income. I guess I'll start with for this day and age, I think credit cards are hovering around 28% average APR. Is debt freedom still as important, or where does that fall in your scale now with these 28%? I'm seeing hashtag cost of living crisis. Like, where is that on your scale of importance today?
Well, I mean, credit cards can be your best friend or your worst enemy. And when I was growing up, I had the fear of God put in me when it came to credit cards. My parents, unfortunately, became victims of, credit card debt and ended up having to file for bankruptcy at one point. And so that for me really helped me understand the importance of being responsible with your credit. So for me, it's always been something that I treat with a lot of respect. And I also always use it with a plan. That looks like, capitalizing on those reward benefits that can come from credit cards, like accruing points or mileage or cash or anything like that. But also always making sure that I only spend what I can afford to pay back in full. Credit cards for me should serve either a purpose of, points hacking, or they can be an emergency fund potentially if you don't have any other avenue for, a big lump sum of money at one point. But I do tend to steer away from using specifically credit card as the debt to make some financial progress. It's just way too expensive most often. And you can probably do better by looking at personal loans or even, just I mean, I don't know how realistic this is, but sometimes borrowing money from somebody is going to be a better deal than putting something on a 28% credit card.
Yeah, something I realized, because people are probably hearing this and like, this hypocrite, because I got Debt Free or Die Trying, my book back here floating on the bookshelf, and really has been my spiel for the last, wrote that in 2016. But I realized I had access to historically cheap debt. I mean, you don't realize that when you're 18 years old, grad from college, you're just like, oh, free money. And so now I was actually doing some research to see what credit card interest rates are out there. I'm like 28% is like double. I felt, it revealed my elder millennial status. I was like, oh, is that what the kids dealing with out there? And to your point, and probably people hearing that for the first time, I was like, if I was to approach the landscape now, and like you said, last resort, I had to go to debt to fund it. And I got one of those from a book called How to Get Rich by Felix Dennis. Mind you, he's talking about 200 million, but rich people always have a fascinating way of looking at that. Yeah. But he said, if I need to get access to 200 million, I would get a line of credit at a fixed rate, and I would sell off an asset to pay it back. And I think a lot of us are like, I need an asset, I'm going to get credit, instead of the other way around, thinking about that mindset of how we're going to pay it off first. I think you'd learn two things. Number one, if you can't get that line of credit, maybe you don't have the means or the asset, your credit score is not there, so you need to do that first line of work. Number two, it'd be a fixed rate, so you know what you're going to pay from month to month. Once again, last resort, I know I got the debt-free people out there, but that's definitely been a change in my stance and just looking at this cost of living environment. Yeah, I totally agree. So to you, if you don't have money, and we're going to be building to people who do have money, I'm sure you're part of the listening audience too, living paycheck to paycheck. We talked about cutting some bills. So I guess that would be step one. What's step two to break out of the cycle?
Well, I think it's going to require some creativity, especially with the big three, right? We're talking about housing, transportation, and food. I am a lucky person in the fact that I love cooking. Not everybody is passionate about the kitchen in the way that I am, but I think there are always opportunities for us to save money when it comes to groceries. One thing that I have found very helpful, because usually when you go to the supermarket, you don't actually know what that bill is going to be until you check out. But if you use free apps, like for instance, the Walmart app, where you can create your grocery list, pre-order them for pickup, you can actually decide how much you want to spend before you even check out. And that can help you get a rein on how much you're spending with groceries. I also love looking at low-cost grocers like Aldi, for example. Just price comparison shopping can be very useful in those instances. When it comes to housing, obviously we live in a time where the wages are not keeping up with the cost of housing. And it's actually, for the first time in recent history, cheaper to rent than it is to own a home. So I think we're navigating a very unique time. And I think this is going to require folks to get a little creative. I see more and more folks becoming multi-generational households, unfortunately, where, folks are moving back in with their parents, moving in with the grandparents. If you're going to do that in order to get yourself ahead financially, I think you have to have a solid plan. Like if you're going to be able to save money on rent because you're moving in with mom and dad for 6 months to a year, make sure that you're using that money to either pay off debt if you're in debt, bulk up your emergency fund, save the down payment for the house, do a career change, go back to school, whatever it is. Use those opportunities that you might have to take that cost of living off of your plate for a while and use it to propel yourself for the next phase of life. And then when it comes to cars, again, this is a really expensive time to buy a car. I think there are creative ways to manage this, whether it's potentially using your car on Turo. For example, you can potentially rent your car when you're not using it. And that's basically just like an application, just like Airbnb, but you can rent your car. So not only are you helping to mitigate the cost of that vehicle, but you're potentially making, some side hustle income. And I think it's also a good idea to never buy a brand new car. Like I've never bought a brand new car off the lot just because depreciation happens so quickly. If you just buy a car that's like 2 or 3 years old, you're getting a lot of that upfront depreciation already taken off of the price and potentially being able to drive something as reliable as a brand new car, but without the exorbitant sticker costs.
Yeah, so I hit 3 things there, all great tips. You called it the big 3. Shout out to Drake and Kendrick and Metro Boomin, who are currently in the big 3 beef right now. I guess I'll shout out J. Cole too, although he's currently in apologetic phase, just
Yeah.
to let the kids know that I still know what's going on out there. But our big three, housing, transportation, and food, is 60% of the average household budget. So a lot of times, we got it'll save on coffee, but if you really want to save money, those are the three areas that you want to focus on, the big three. And 30% of that for most people, actually, well, let me finish that thought. 30% of that is housing, house or rent, whether you have a mortgage or rent for most people. But I saw a report that came out from Harvard, and I think it said half of Americans now spend more than 30% of their income. It goes up from there, with some spending 40, 50, 60% of their income just on basically keeping a roof over their head. The other shout out, since I'm down here in Texas, not sure where you're from, I'll shout out HEB. Actually, I shout out HEB and I double shout out my wife because I didn't even know this. So she orders through the app, which I just thought she was, being convenient or whatever. Then one day she was like, "Yeah, this is free." And I was like, "Why do we ever go to the store?"
Yep. I don't even bother.
I hate dealing with people. I was like, she shouldn't have told me that. So I had set foot in the store about a quarter now. So a lot of these apps, I think, is this assumption, that costs money. I mean, I assumed it's so easy and free and convenient that then I felt bad because I pulled up and there was actually a woman, and I, all equality, but she must have been 16 chucking out my 40 gallons worth of groceries. I'm like, should I get out? Is that improper?
I know, it's weird. It's like, what do you do? Do we help them?
She's like, just pop the trunk. I'm like, shit, what's my role here? So I'll let y'all work that out at home. But shout out to her as well because she was moving them bottles.